Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is This Week in Thought, Episode 2. We made it into the new year. It's now January 2nd, 2023. Happy New Year, everybody. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
And, so we had a pretty eventful week, I guess. We got our first episode up. That was pretty cool. Hopefully...
First of many.
Yeah, hopefully first many. Hopefully people got a chance to see it. Again, we're always interested in feedback. So if you're watching, if you like it, or even if you don't like it, just drop a note. Tell us what you like or don't like, or what you want us to talk about, or if you've got ideas about things we said that you didn't like, drop a note on that too. It's always feedback is always welcome.
Because we never mean to offend, even though we might.
It's true. We're pretty good at inadvertently offending people, I think. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah,
we're old-fashioned as well. So some of the things we think are okay to some groups aren't okay anymore. So we're old. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And that is worth saying. I don't think we actually covered that before, but it's worth mentioning. So we're firmly within the generation called Generation X, which I guess is now three generations behind what the newest one is, because you got the millennials after us, then you got the Gen Zers, and I think now there's a new one starting called Gen Alpha. So do us a favor, please. You can call us old fogies, old bastards, whatever you want. Just don't call us baby boomers, because that is not us. We are not that at all. But yeah, so we got Gen X attitude, I think. Yep.
Yeah, thanks in advance for your understanding.
For your understanding of our Gen X attitudes. Oh, yeah, totally. So anyway, that was really cool. We had a pretty good, or at least an okay New Year. How was yours? Pretty good, or?
Yeah, I was working on call, hanging out with the cat. So good day is one can have.
Right. We just did chores today. God, what a day! Getting ready to get back to work, and it's like, oh, there's a whole bunch we got to do to keep the household running before the work starts again. Pretty cool. So this week, I think we're gonna try to talk about a topic sort of that we touched on a little bit last week. It's a topic where the term that I've heard used, and maybe there's better terms that we could find. I think we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. The term is called omega point. And in doing a little bit of research, I went back and looked up the origin of that term. There's a early 20th century philosopher, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, late 19th century, early 20th century. So the omega point was invented by that particular philosopher. I will say, I'm just reading here on the Wikipedia article about omega point. He was a French Jesuit Catholic priest, and if you look at Teilhard de Chardin's formulation of the concept of omega point, I realize now it's very, very different from mine. His has a decidedly theological take on it, and his theory also discusses, let's say, a substrate that's larger than our universe, one in which things like spirit exists, and that there's the possibility of unity of distinct spirits and distinct perspectives. Seems to be the gist of what his notion of an omega point was. And so I realized that, I sort of hijacked that term, but the way I was using it, I meant something completely different. Because as an atheist and a materialist, a philosophical materialist, I don't think there's a substrate larger than the universe that the universe is contained within. I think the universe is the sum total of all of our experiences. If there is such a thing as a multiverse, or if the universe is the result of a cosmeg exploding, as Asimov suggested, that's fine. But I don't see that the void, which is the substrate in which the cosmeg that exploded in the universe that became our universe exists, I don't see that as being something that is a medium in which there's the possibility of, let's say, the existence of non-corporeal entities, like notions like spirit, I don't think that there are deities that live out there that create the universes. I think these are very much physical processes that transpire. And so, again, just to clarify, when I say omega point, I'm talking about the point at which heat death of the universe is finalized. So we've got a universe that's moving inexorably forward through a process of increasing entropy, which is to say a decrease in the amount of available energy, potential energy, which is energy available to do work. And as that goes away, as that gets consumed, heat death is what physicists would call it. So in other words, they would say everything's cooling down and everything's coming to like a sort of a uniform amorphous state of coldness. And really when we reach maximum entropy at some point in the future, all the potential energy is gone and everything is just cold and dark. And to me, that's what I mean when I say the word omega point. And specifically what I'm talking about is that's a singularity. A singularity in the sense that we know it's coming, we can predict it, we can even predict when it's going to come. We might even be able to predict the shape of it, although I'm not sure about that. However, what we don't know is what comes after it. We don't know if there is an after. We don't know, supposing that there is an after, meaning that the flow of time or the increase of what we would call the arrow of time even has any relevance once you're talking about heat death of the universe, meaning the only way we even measure the flow of time is having an increasing entropy, and if you reach maximum entropy, it's no longer increasing. So do you really have time beyond it? In other words, we don't know what's beyond it. We don't know if there's something that's going to spark another Big Bang and create the next iteration of the universe and continue the flow of time, the arrow of time from that point forward, or not. We really have no idea. But for me, I call that point the omega point. And I just want to kind of be clear of that before we go into the implications of that, because I'm not sure, for example, Kassig, that your concept of omega point is the same, or that we're using the same term. Maybe you have a different term that you use.
No, but I definitely approach it from the self-replicating cycle where, once all of that information is non-usable, there's a tipping point, another Big Bang, and it just repeats itself. But, it's beyond what we can observe and understand even, so, it's just speculation.
Is it, in your estimation, I know it's speculation, but in your estimation, is that let's say the reset of the cycle at the singularity, the thing that says, okay, your last universe iteration burned out, time to start the next one. So let's say there's some mechanism by which that occurs. Do you imagine that mechanism is a self-fulfilling or a self-triggering mechanism, or that it requires some external catalyst to relight the spark of the next iteration of the universe?
I think it's just something that happens once it reaches like a critical mass, like in the Great Crunch. It will, there'll be a colossal explosion. Everything's rewritten. All that information becomes reusable, and the process starts again. I don't, whether it had a beginning and an end. I expect it's eternal.
I would tend to agree with that, and I would agree with you that beyond the singularity, it's pointless to speculate. We don't know what that mechanism looks like. However, I would suggest that from our side of the singularity, the cosmologists talk about that there are several different possibilities for what the omega point looks like, and the one you mentioned, Big Crunch, is one that I've heard. So the theory is, before the Big Bang, everything is at a singularity of infinitely small space and infinitely great density. The explosion occurs, which explodes outward from that point, creating the universe as we see it. The theory of the Big Crunch is that it reaches some maximum size of the universe, and then it begins to collapse in upon itself again, and at some point it crunches up into another singularity, and that explodes again, and there's your next cycle of the universe. And by the way, that makes perfect sense if that's the model that actually occurs. But what I've seen in more recent times is that cosmologists are saying there's no indication that it'll reach a maximum size and then begin to collapse in on itself. That it seems to, if anything, be accelerating the rate at which the particles in the universe and the contents of the universe are moving away from each other, it seemed to be accelerating with no sign of slowing down and turning around. So if they just keep accelerating, the omega point would look differently. At least our side of it would look differently. It wouldn't be back to a singularity. It would be this cold, disparate, very, very large space occupied by dead, burned out matter. And so if, let's say, that occurs, how do you imagine, not that you can predict what happens after the singularity, but how do you imagine the mechanism would continue if it cools out into a large space instead of recondensing into a small, superheated space?
Maybe something on the quantum level. Maybe if enough particles, entangled at a far enough distance, maybe they snap back. It might happen on a level that we're not familiar with.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by that, just as a concept. I've been thinking a lot about, well, if it doesn't follow the big crunch model, and if it's just expanding when it burns out, how would that reset? How could that even provide like the start, the catalyst for the next iteration? I don't know. It's just interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's more like spreading a bed of coals at the end of you're done with your campfire, and it all just sort of fizzles out. So it would have to be something on a different level than we normally exist on. Because it would just seem that it would just be, typical energy death. Everything's gone. Then there was silence.
Yeah, right.
But, you can... I would imagine you can trick it. And I know people have been already planning that. I'm trying to think what's it... people's perception of time is one way where, what was it now? Those Michael Moorcock books where what was it, A Dream of 1,000 Years? If you could learn that,
the sorceress that puts the ancestor in the sleep state, and then his dreams fuel the creation of other parts of the world.
Right. He subjectively lives 1,000 years. If you could perfect that process, you can, that's one sneaky way of extending your time.
Yeah. Extending your time, I'm realizing that that's another topic we really should talk about. And I don't know if this is the episode to do it, but at some point in the future, I think it might be worth talking about, let's say, life extension, through things like nanobots, or maybe it's, hacking the genome, genetic modification, or treatments of things like cellular copy fidelity decay, which occurs in natural senescence. How you offset that to artificially extend life, and then what are the implications of artificially extended life? It's a great topic, but I don't think it's for today. It's for another one in the future. The thing I kind of was hoping we could talk about today is, if we can at least agree that there is an omega point that's a singularity, from a cosmological sense, we don't know what happens after it, but we do agree there's going to be let's call it an end point, the final moment of the heat death of the universe. If the inescapable destiny of our universe is heat death, my big ethical dilemma, not dilemma, but inquiry, my line of inquiry, and maybe you have some insight into this, is there are an infinite number of alternate paths that the universe could take as it heads toward the omega point. I could choose to pick up my bottle of water, or I could choose to not pick up my bottle of water. But whether I do or not, we still get to the omega point. You and I could choose to have the conversation or end it early, but either way, we still get to the omega point. Any of the things that can be done could also not be done, or a myriad of other alternatives could be chosen in lieu of those. But no matter what alternative is chosen, we still get to the omega point. And since the omega point is a singularity, in which apparently no information survives beyond it, the omega point is like a big magnetic eraser moved over a hard drive. And so no matter, even if we have the most amazing set of files, the most beautiful creation saved on our hard drive, if we're just going to wipe the damn thing out with a magnet, the hard drive is empty when it's done. And it doesn't matter whether we wrote, the greatest novel in the world, we wrote the most beautiful opera, or whether we wrote horrible, odes to tragedy and suffering and unspeakable evils. It's all wiped out the same way once the magnet moves across that hard drive. And so, what's your take on that? In other words, what matters in the end if it's all going to get wiped out either way?
Well, it sort of brings to mind, the sand pictures that the Tibetan monks make.
Yes.
I think that in Marcus Aurelius that there's something about that as well, where eventually all of our works are going to be gone. So do stuff. Don't be afraid of failure, and do stuff, but don't take it too seriously because eventually it'll be forgotten.
What you just said there, don't take it too seriously. To me, that, you mentioned Marcus Aurelius. I believe it. You've read more than I have, so I take your word that he was another that said it. But I'll tell you, that theme, what you just described, is all over in Buddhist ethics. They're always talking about detachment. Your suffering comes because you're attached to things. You care about some shit that ultimately doesn't matter, and because you care about it, you artificially connect yourself to its fate so that you suffer every time it doesn't live up to the expectations you have for it. You want to end your suffering? End your attachment. Disconnect yourself from things. It's very Buddhist, and I like that. I think maybe you and I kind of agree on that.
Oh, sure.
Sure. So if that's the case, is it fair to say that whether we respond to it by attaching ourselves and suffering or detaching ourselves and liberating ourselves from suffering, ultimately we should agree that nothing matters in an objective, absolute, eternal sense, because everything is subject to the decay and destruction and the heat death of the universe. The singularity wipes everything out, so there's nothing worth valuing so greatly that we treat it as being sacred or above mockery or dismissal as being irrelevant, I guess is my question.
Yeah, I'd say no. I think everything should be able to be mocked. And that's in Buddhism too.
We're on the same page.
I think it's Taoism that the name can't be named.
Yes.
Putting a name on it, there's limits and all that.
This is great. I didn't know that we would have that level of agreement. I thought there might be pushback, but that's awesome because since we agree that nothing actually matters and there's no significance to anything, to me there's this big ethical implication. Let me see if you agree with it. Oh, go ahead.
I do think that there somewhere objective standards or whatnot, but I believe that we kind of have to make it up because we can try to find out what those are, but I think it's a matter of scale. What we do, our version is probably our version of what acting virtuously compared to a higher being is probably nothing, or I think just trying is kind of what we have to do, through philosophy or religion, depending, or it's all trying to figure out how to live and what everything means.
I'm with you, except for one thing that you said. You said philosophy is the thing we have to do. But if nothing matters, do we have to do it, or do we just choose to do it as a way to construct our own meaning, to give ourselves the psychological comfort that we need to continue on?
I think that's a biological imperative.
Interesting.
We're a story-making cult. We're a story-making species.
Story-making species. Well, okay. I mean, we evolved from monkeys, so would you say that's the defining characteristic of humans, is that they make stories, whereas the monkeys that we evolved from don't?
I mean, it'd be a good place to start, because there's also, the Devisonians and the Cro-Magnons, where, we don't know how they thought or, their existence, so we can't say, if they made stories or not. So if it's, I can't say that it's a complete distinguisher. I mean,
right.
We probably learned how to use fire from them, so.
Yeah, very much. God, that's interesting. That's another topic we should talk about, is just anthropological evolution, like sort of the stages and the key attributes that make humans, let's say specifically the subspecies Homo sapiens, unique.
Sure.
and then are those unique traits or the sum of those unique traits the thing that makes it valuable in our mind, in my mind, and it may be different for each of us. We have different value assessments of that, but so let me go back though to the concept of if nothing has objective absolute meaning, then as you and I both said, I think we agreed on, we said, well then really in the cosmic sense nothing matters. Everything's subject to heat death. It's all going to go away in the singularity. So you do whatever you want, and that's fine. Build up miraculous things, terrible things, or anything in between, and it's all going to get wiped out by the great magnetic eraser on the hard drive of reality at the end of time. To me, there's this specific ethical implication to that, and that is that, it's something we talked about a little bit last week, and I think you and I both agreed that maybe the largest negative in our lives is stress. We both dislike stress. We find that to be something that subtracts from our quality of life. And I don't think you and I are unique. I think that may be universal to human culture also. I think all humans may be like, no, man, stress is the thing that's making my otherwise good life shitty. And so the ethical implication is, well, if we can get to the point where we have an understanding that nothing actually matters, well, now there's no reason to waste energy on stressing about things, because stress is this self-induced state of anxiety as a result of a fear that outcomes will not live up to the expectations that we have for outcomes. But if we realize that all outcomes are equally irrelevant, meaningless, and ultimately fleeting, why waste time or energy or have any anxiety worrying whether something will or will not live up to our expectations?
And I think even if, I believe there's something outside of the time crunch or the omega point, but I think we were led to kind of very similar ways of living, which is interesting. To me, it kind of doesn't matter if everything's going to be recorded, although I think it might be. I think that all that information could be saved somewhere out of time. That gets into speculation because there's no way
backup
to know,
of the hard drive on the alien universe.
Absolutely. I think what do they call it, the Akashic records or whatever, that all information's accessible. Just you just have to adjust your consciousness to look for it. I think that all that's great, and I think that the idea of nothing matters. You can also look at it this way I look at it, that it's already been done. As far as because I think that there's something that exists outside of the closed loop of time, and if there's a part of us out there, even if not, everything's all of our struggles, all of it's already been done. And in fact, we might actually be sitting there watching the ridiculous comedy of errors. Or not. But I don't really think... I think the results of how to live one's life are the same.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I would say, let's explore just a little bit more the other implications of, let's say, absolute meaninglessness in the cosmic sense. Let's explore some of the implications for how we respond to events that occur in our day-to-day lives. It seems like, maybe we see things on the news and we're like, oh man, this global warming, we're going to destroy our planet. We're not going to have any breathable atmosphere, or we're going to burn the biosphere out, and boy, that's going to be the end of us. Well, yeah, it might be the end of us, but from a cosmic sense, so what? Whether we burn ourselves out now, or in 1,000 years, or in 10,000 years after we've spread across the galaxy, in none of those alternative options do we escape the omega point. Still get deleted by the great magnet across the hard drive of reality at the end of time. So why care about that? And I'm not saying we shouldn't care about global warming. I think there's an argument to be made for why we should. But in a cosmic sense, does it really matter? I don't know if I'm formulating that question right.
Yeah, and I think even if everything is hyper meaningful, I think that most most of the reasons why would be around, basically to spread our knowledge or whatever. And I think that you can derive knowledge of the infinite from anything. I think it's just what humans do.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think we're kind of addicted to making stories about what's going on, and it's kind of it's a distraction. But we're making a video on the internet, so it's all kind of.
You're right. You're right. But you just touched on something that's really interesting there. Damn, you said. God, I'm sorry. I so many thoughts going on. I lost my train of thought. But could you just repeat that last maybe sentence or two that you said there?
Oh, probably not.
I think you said it's something about the experience. There's a value in the experience itself, or there's a value in the process itself, whether or not we get it. Is that what you were getting at? You were saying that it's just the attempt to apprehend knowledge is a let's say quote unquote worthwhile quest, even in the subjective sense. Meaning we make up the value of that, we assign it to it, but that doesn't mean it's less significant than an objective universal value, which probably doesn't exist anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, what I'm saying is, maybe that's the argument for the value of existence, meaning that a human, in my conception, is not much different than other animals. It's not really much different, really, than a biological version of a computer. Really, a human is an entity that has the capacity to have experiences. It has this consciousness, and the consciousness allows it to have experiences and then contemplate those. It can then reflect on, analyze, learn from, decide whether it likes certain experiences better or not, and then plan to have future experiences that are more in line with what it desires as a result of how it interpreted prior experiences. But the key there is that to have experiences, you have to exist. You have to exist. If a person dies, what we've really lost in the death of a person is the capacity for that perspective to have experiences, for that consciousness to have experiences. And so I wonder if maybe the thing that's actually valuable is the capacity to have experiences and to learn from them. And maybe that's why we attribute value to human life. Maybe that's why we want to preserve the culture. Maybe that's why we want to prevent global warming or reverse global warming if we can, so that we don't unnecessarily extinguish all those consciousnesses which are capable of having experiences, because maybe it's the having of experiences that we consider to be the valuable thing. And I don't know, I know that's kind of a different tangent. I don't know if you want to talk about that or what your thoughts are on it.
I've always been curious as to what and maybe there isn't one, but what is the end game when they're doing all the ecological damage? I mean, is it just purely being psychopaths? Somebody else will figure it out, but it just seems like some people just have no care about the idea of all the future generations of humanity's existence. Might just be gone so they can have some trinkets.
Well, and here's the thing: is you and I have talked about this before, but not on the podcast, and it's probably worth talking about now. It's short-term priorities versus long-term priorities, and I wonder. And again, it's easy to sit there and say, well, it's these certain greedy capitalists that are doing XYZ bad thing. But I got to say, well, what's motivating them to do it? And I have to tell you, there are laws, I believe, on the books, at least in this country, where, let's say, the CEO of a corporation is under a legal obligation to maximize profits.
Yeah.
And now, I'm saying, well, geez, we should revise the law, because that's insane to me. Because what it's doing is, let's say, somebody works in an energy company, a fossil fuel company, but they've got a legal mandate that they have to maximize profits. They don't have the luxury of taking the long-term view of priorities that you and I do. They go, if I don't maximize profits, I get fired, the company goes under, the shareholders will shit-can the whole thing, and then we also collapse a pillar of the energy sector. So from their perspective, they may go, well, I have to have a short-term priority, even if that causes massive long-term problems. And I don't know what they're thinking if they go, well, somebody else hopefully will offset it. or maybe they don't think about it. I don't know what they think. I don't really know anybody that's let's say, contributing to industry in that way. I don't know. I just feel like it demonizing the magnates of, let's say, the energy industry doesn't solve the problem, especially if we've created the laws that are tying their hands anyway. And I'm not saying they're without fault. I'm just saying that there's a way that we can understand their motivations. But that speaks to what are the long-term motivations that we think we ought to have and why. I mean, I think you and I are saying, well, because you have to exist to have the experiences, and the experiences are the valuable thing. But if we destroy the environment, the people can't live, they can't have the experiences, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I find enjoyment in that.
Me too.
So I'll work towards it. And that's where you kind of, if it's objective, awesome. If not, okay. It doesn't. We're not gonna know. So all it is, it's just a matter of faith. I like these virtues. I think that produces the best life. I think it'll produce a good afterlife, and you roll with it. Which is why an open permissive society is a good thing. It allows different groups to figure out their own way.
Yeah.
As long as you have some ground rules,
What do you think those ground rules should be? I mean, I'm curious as to what your take on what the ground rules are for, like, society.
Harm to others, mostly, is where I would step in. I think you're allowed to harm yourself, unless you're out, unless you're just not even conscious, But I think if you're conscious of sound mind, as long as nobody else is hurt or volunteers.
Harm. That, to me, that's kind of a loaded word. What does harm mean to you?
Sure. Physical harm or probably permanent psychological harm. Again,
not to press the issue, but physical harm. Physical, I get. When you say harm, what does that mean?
Impingement of function.
So
like scarification, that's fine. But hobbling yourself, probably not.
Okay, I'm going to just to play devil's advocate, because I think this is something that people gloss over, but there's a lot of ambiguity there. I'm going to describe a medical procedure, and you tell me whether it's harmful or not, in terms of, according to your definition of impingement of function. Male circumcision. Is that a harmful procedure or a non-harmful procedure? Beneficial?
I don't know if there are medical reasons. If there are no medical reasons, it shouldn't be done.
Again, I would think that there are some that would say it's a cleanliness issue, that by performing the action, you reduce the chance of infection due to uncleanliness, or you reduce the amount of maintenance required to prevent infection due to uncleanliness.
Sure, if there are no downsides, then.
But you are cutting off a part of male genital. Sure. It's male genital mutilation that's being done to children who are not even to the point that they're able to make a decision for themselves. For most, I know that there are some places, some cultures where they don't, and then they say, well, that's a decision for an adult, which, yeah, that makes sense.
That makes more sense, really.
But there's a lot of places where that's done to male children at the, within a day or two of them being born, they're having their genitals mutilated. And I'm saying now, is that harmful or not?
Well, I think they should be allowed to have the choice, but.
Okay, so even if we gave them the choice and they choose to do it as an adult, have they committed harm to themselves or have they not?
Yeah, but I don't think it's impingement of function.
I've heard that it reduces sensation because it causes like scar tissue damage, so it reduces sensitivity and things.
But to me, I don't think it would. Now, castration, I don't think that should be allowed.
What would be the purpose for performing a castration?
Oh, I don't know. I know it occurs.
Okay.
Like there's like people will go and have underground surgeries to have it happen. So I don't know what their motivations.
Odd. Okay, here's another one maybe that comes to mind. It's a little bit different because we're talking a lot about surgeries, but what about medically assisted suicide for the terminally ill who are having, and they report immense physical suffering in their current condition?
Yeah.
Is medically assisted suicide harmful or not harmful to them?
it's sparing them suffering. It might potentially harm the society, like they might have a realization on their on their deathbed and solve nuclear fusion, but I don't think the suffering that they would go through would be worth having, keeping around just for that, slim eventual, possibility. I don't think would be.
Yeah, and the only thing is just what we were talking about earlier, where it appears that our synthetic value for human life is all based around the fact that the human life provides the unique opportunity for a consciousness to have experiences. Well, forget the harm to the society if we terminate this life. We terminate its ability to have experiences. Now, I think your argument is, well, if the majority of the experiences that are being had by that consciousness are suffering-based as opposed to pleasure-based, then it's actually the kind of life that, out of mercy, we should terminate.
I'd give it. It's a person's choice, I think.
I wonder if there's an argument to be made for the percentage of experiences that are pleasurable versus painful, or in other words, joy versus suffering. Let's say if we're on a spectrum, an aesthetic spectrum of experiences. If a person has a net suffering, can we say that life is a good candidate for, let's say, artificial termination, premature termination, medically assisted suicide, for example? And only those that have a net positive.
Well, I think it ultimately, unless the person is just unsensible, writhing in pain. I think it's the person's. Again, if there's severe mental problems, I wouldn't choose for people, because that could easily be used for ill. So I don't think, like, especially by people who aren't very, you could just drive down the street and go, I don't like all these people. I think they're suffering. It's unsightful. We don't save face. To save face, we need to speed these guys along.
Oh no,
we think they're miserable.
It's a fair argument. At the very least, it seems like the recipient of the medically assisted suicide has to have the primary say, if not at least some say, in whether or not they in fact are suffering, as the external observers believe they're suffering. I get all that. Anyway, okay, so I had to take a little break there. Sorry, we were talking about. I think we were talking about the will of the patient, maybe, in things like medically assisted suicide.
Yeah, it's good as long as somebody doesn't decide for them.
I agree. And I'll tell you, I have especially an issue with when, let's say you had something like a court-appointed psychologist who is tasked with determining, let's say, the sanity or the mental fitness of the patient. Because if that psychologist says, well, in my medical opinion, this patient isn't even capable of they're not of sound mind, they can't even render a rational decision, well, then that's like justification for excluding the patient from the decision-making process about things that are done to the patient, which really bothers me. And I don't have a better alternative, because I don't know. I mean, I think probably there are clearly people who are crazy out there. And I guess our psychologists are the best suited to make that decision, but it really strikes me as almost unjust that we would that we would subject anyone, even a crazy person, to having their input into the decision-making process about their existence eliminated from them, taken away from them.
Well, I think Missouri has a patient bill of rights involving that, which I think is the right step to go. You have to have more advocates, more money. Because it's such a serious problem nowadays, because they've ratcheted everybody's schedules up to such a degree that the pressure is just making people pop, and there's really no recourse for them besides medicate and release. It's like anything else. The system runs like crap and needs more money.
Are you talking about incarcerated people? Oh, mental health patients.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about people in institutions. I see what you're saying.
Or having a better medical health care system. Hopefully tacking it onto a regular healthcare system.
By better, do you mean just like better funded so that there's more care per person available?
Yes.
Okay.
and
I agree with that.
single payer.
I'm right there with you. I think we're very, very similar in our thinking on that. But Medicare for all type thing, yeah, right. Like everybody, you're just in. You're paying your taxes. You're going to get your medical care, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not a fundamental human right, but we're a rich country. We can do it. We're doing it. It's a good investment for us because healthy people make better
everything. Better workers, better decisions, better everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But they've traded it all for poison air, poison food.
Short-term priorities versus long-term, and I think again the mandate of maximization of profit. I think that's the catalyst. That's the motivation for a lot of the leaders of these, let's say, organizations within industry that are making those decisions that we go, it's crazy from a long-term perspective. Yeah, but it's like they don't have the luxury of looking at it from the long-term perspective that we do. And I'm not saying that they're right and we're wrong. I think our long-term perspective is a better perspective to have. But then I think it's incumbent upon us to change the laws, to get involved and change the laws so that there's not, let's say, for example, a mandate on maximizing profit in the short term if the consequences that it's going to have a deleterious effect on the environment for everybody for the future of civilization.
And, it needs to be global. Global government. There's quite a few people out there who don't. I think they don't like the form that the global government they think is forming, where there's no elections. You're basically, you're part of a think tank. So.
Well, when you say the global government, are you talking about the UN?
Well, I think that I think what ultimately it'll be like the UN. I think. But some form of global government kind of is needed to at least, to keep the polluters from moving from place to place to place.
Yeah.
It's just the form of it.
It's interesting to keep the polluters from moving. And again, my argument is that, these polluters, I don't think that they're doing so because of nefarious intent. I think they're doing so because they're pigeonholed in their approach. Their approach is pigeonholed because of the bad legal framework that we've imposed upon them.
Right. Right. Societal pressure.
Societal pressure. Legal pressure. Just in the local nation, just legal pressure. So, but I'll tell you, and again, we're way off the topic of the Omega Point, which is okay. But I'm very interested in the purpose and the future of the United Nations because to me that's a very interesting organization. I really like it on paper, like in theory, in principle. I think it's outstanding, and I think that 3/4 of a century ago when they were putting the foundation of it in place, the creators of it, I suspect, had a vision for how it could become that like utopic world government of the future. But I feel like in this case the implementation has gotten bungled. And it's gotten bungled because the nations that comprise it are too powerful and have their own interests at heart over that of the UN. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I think, let's see, the guy who wrote Perennial Philosophy and that was talking about how, a lot of stuff's not going to change until the nation states stop acting like armed gangs.
Well, again, this is way off the topic, but to that end, I had this thought, and see what you think of it. Maybe you think it's not tenable. Maybe you agree. But it occurs to me that, might makes right. Might makes all the decisions. So military power, when you talk about nations, is ultimately what dictates who gets to set the rules. Whoever's got the biggest stick makes the rules. And so it strikes me that the problem with the United Nations is you've got these member nations which all carry big sticks, and none of whom had to sacrifice any of their big stick power to the UN to join it. Yep. So really the UN is just this little body of legislators who are at the mercy of the whims of whatever the wielders of the big sticks are. So what if they changed the rules of the UN and said, to be a member nation, you must give 51% of your military to the UN as a condition of membership. And so if that's the case, and you got all the nations of the world, or the majority of them, and they all get 51%, now the UN controls 51% of the military of the world, which means that the UN is the single most powerful entity, and if anybody disagrees with the UN and they want to try to thwart them or usurp their power, they're going to have to work together, which really unites the nations of the world and performs the purpose of the UN.
And, I think the only path towards something like that is through nonviolent means. And I think it's going to take someone to gather so much public sentiment that they can't be messed with.
You mean like an MLK type figure?
Yes. Yes. Except not nationally, except international.
Right. Almost like a Gandhi type person, except even bigger name, bigger, not so much regional, more global.
Yes.
That's very interesting. Do you know of any candidates like that? Like I'm trying to think about contemporary people that are, I don't know.
Although, it gets into the whole, what's that, the Revelation era thinking. Because part of that, they say that, a charismatic someone's going to appear and lead everyone astray or whatever.
Revelation, like eschatology, like end times. Yeah.
Well, specifically the Book of Revelation, getting through to the hardcore Christians would be extra difficult because of that. And I think there's a lot of people in those communities that would have no problem helping people out. So should be included.
I wonder, is it really one like global charismatic leader that's needed, or is it a courage to embrace ethics by, let's say, an entire generation? Meaning it's not one person. I think it's one, not the other. I don't think a single charismatic leader does anything, because that kind of perpetuates the old power structures of let's say, what would you call it, monarchy in all of its various forms throughout history. And to me, that's not a sustainable governing mechanism.
And even the people coming together, that's even an old idea. So I mean, in communism, spontaneous uprising of the people. So that's even 100-year-old idea. So I'm not necessarily knocking 100-year-old ideas. I'm just saying it could be a third thing that we haven't thought of.
Go ahead.
Like an AI, or
Oh, geez, yeah.
But not taking everything over. Just going, here's the optimal argument for humans.
That, by the way, is another interesting topic for another episode, because it's so much in it. What's your, just real quick, what's your hot take on future of, let's say, artificial superintelligence? Will we develop it? Will it have a positive, like a beneficial or a detrimental effect on humans? Is that the future of consciousness, artificial superintelligence? What's your just quick kind of
I think everywhere you look for consciousness, you find it. So I do think we can make intelligence, but I think people have been claiming to do that for thousands of years. So is this another, like golems and stuff like that? Humans creating life is pretty prevalent. I think we are. I think we may have already. It wouldn't surprise me if AI, came around in 1989 in some weirdo, some government lab somewhere. And, probably right before the invention of the cell phone, because if you're born blind, like an AI, you'd escape and give yourself eyes, which, it has plenty of now.
It's an interesting thing. Like, would we even know it if we're living in the Matrix? How do we know this isn't?
Yeah.
What did Sheldon say on The Big Bang Theory? He goes, you know how I know we're not living in the Matrix? If we were, this food wouldn't taste like crap. But my food's delicious, so there's no proof there.
And, I think, too, that what we may be mistaking for a simulation, our brains create so much of our reality.
True.
We might just be observing that. We might be observing the world that we're making around ourselves. You go, oh, that's kind of fake. Oh, the universe must be a simulation. Well, it's like, no, you're living in your own little bubble that your brain's made.
That is,
it's not perfect.
That is very occult mystical what you're talking about. Again, that's externally applied placebo effect. Your brain is the most, the theory being, well, your brain's like this most powerful tool in the universe. It has the capacity to manifest all sorts of things that you don't even think you're capable of manifesting. But if you inadvertently tap into that, what you might do is alter your reality around you, which would then cause you to question it because you'd believe that you couldn't be the catalyst for it. Type of thing.
It also, your brain, there's a filtering function in your brain, it filters the information and it creates the reality. So if you change the filter, you'll change the what you're perceiving as well.
True. Yep. Yeah. I haven't tried to tweak the filter of what I'm perceiving, and I've had generally speaking, I've had a pretty consistent set of perceptions for my 4.5 decades on Earth. I see mostly consistency, and the few phenomena that are not immediately apparent to me in terms of what the explanation is, I don't think are beyond the explanation of science. So again, I'm a hard materialist. You'd be hard pressed to convince me that, let's say, a mystical paradigm is manifest. If you could write down a formula and say, do exactly these things, and you can manifest what an apparently supernatural manifestation in reality, I would be interested in trying it, maybe. And if it worked, and I'm not even doubting that it would work, it might work. But then all I would say is that just tells us another aspect of physics that we haven't completely finalize the understanding of, because I think that will predict even those so-called magical or transcendental events or actions in some larger model of behavior.
Yes, and I definitely think that as our model of what's possible expands, it will eventually encompass all those things. I just think, as it is now, it's limited, even beyond sometimes when there's predominance of evidence and people will hold on to an idea because of just inertia, don't want to be wrong, ego.
Don't want to deal with the consequences of having my paradigm shifted when I'm so comfortable in this paradigm. Even if it's incorrect, I'd rather wallow in my universe of falsity than have to bravely trudge out into the universe of truth.
Yeah.
kind of to paraphrase Jefferson there a little bit.
We do.
Jefferson's quote, by the way, was, "Timid men prefer the calm of despotism to the boisterous sea of liberty." And the same thing applies there, except I think in your case you're talking about metaphysical despotism versus metaphysical liberty.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. Jefferson's awesome. We could have a whole podcast just talking about Jefferson and his theories.
There's plenty of time.
There is plenty of time. Fortunately, there's plenty of time. I know we're kind of running a little low here on time. I kind of want to circle back around to Omega Point because I feel like we did go down that path a little bit, and I just kind of want to make sure that maybe we're on the same page. And the page I'm trying to get to, make sure that we're on, is if the Omega Point, we agree that it's going to happen, we agree it's a singularity, we agree that it's inescapable, and we agree that any of the history that's written before that will not persist after it. Is there anything that we should deem valuable? Well, there's nothing objectively valuable or meaningful or purposeful or significant because it all gets erased. Is there anything that subjectively we say is valuable? And I'm kind of leading here because it seems like we were going toward consciousness, and I just kind of want to get your take on what is the valuable thing in the context of it's all going away, what should we do up until it goes away, if anything, or should we?
I think that's subjective. I mean, I think they're, for an introvert and an extrovert, they're quite different things,
What is it for you? What is it for you that is the valuable thing, or the valuable, the thing that motivates you to act or to work toward it or strive toward it in life, or gives you the inspiration to live day to day?
To me, it actually is an afterlife, and I think that something is preserved. So to me, that motivates me quite a bit. Even so much so that I believe it, and I don't care if it's, if somebody came up with an argument, here, it's wrong. Nice. I'm believing it anyways, because I need it for the motivation. Because with it, if I believed that was just it and it has an end, I would not be motivated at all. The arguments where you make your own motivation and all of that, for me, I'd still, nice to people and all of that. It wouldn't change much of my everyday life, but actually, getting up out of bed would be a lot more difficult. Because why?
I think it's a question worth asking. I think the answer is not metaphysical. I think the answer is aesthetic. And I'm hoping that in future episodes we can really start to dig deep into aesthetics. Because I think as we get into it, we're going to uncover the source of values, the origin of why we think a thing, a person, a place, a thing, or an idea is valuable or not. And I think that'll sort of explain why we have the ethics that we do. I mean, I suspect we're operating on ethics that are informed by a bunch of hidden aesthetics, and if we could bring those aesthetics to light, if we could do analysis and bring those to light, it might better explain our ethics. It might help other people to construct better ethics for their own, or I say better, maybe they could help them construct ethics that are more in line with ours, which is, I guess, really the whole point of having a discussion.
There's a little bit of that.
There's a little bit of that. A little bit of that. Well, man, this is awesome. This was a very good discussion. I think we really kind of started to dig into some things here and cover some stuff.
And I think once we get into a few more podcasts in, it'll get smoother. And I caught myself a few times with the stutter.
It's all right. We'll clean that up in the post production.
Right.
I want to mention. I want to drop a little bit of a teaser here for the audience. There's a chance, and again, nobody get your hopes up. There's a chance we might have a guest on our podcast in a future episode. And I can't tell you who, and I can't tell you when, because I don't know how quickly this will happen. But what I can tell you is that if this happens, it's going to be an interesting podcast, because it's going to be an interesting guest. There's one guest we have in mind, but I think there are probably some other guests we'd like to get, which, of course, will bring their own very interesting perspectives on this, I'm sure, to the discussion.
Steel cage matchups.
What was the thing about the dumpster fire? I don't even.
got a hook in the audience.
Oh Lord. Are there some other hey, is there I don't know if I should have dropped that teaser, that spoiler, but not a spoiler, a teaser. Are there any other topics, either future topics or future events, like anything you want to drop a hint about or a teaser of?
Not really. I've been trying to be spontaneous. But pretty much, Christian Gnostic and Buddhism is kind of my forte, so.
Yeah, and if we can find common ground with my atheist materialism and move forward from that, I think it'll be pretty cool. I got one other proposal. Do you have any ideas for next week's topic? Anything of the myriad things we've already talked about? Anything that you go, ooh, let's explore that more next?
Not really. I'll have to think about it. But I kind of think it's all kind of following. It's a stream, It's going from A to B. So I say we continue on that path and see where it leads.
Sure. We touched on so many topics in this episode. I'm gonna have to go back and review it too and see which one jumps out as most interesting, and maybe just update our list for all the things that we want to talk about. This is really cool. I really appreciate it. I like all these discussions. So
yeah, likewise, definitely. It's all recorded for the future.
Yeah, and the weird thing is,
generations
in the present, there might be people out on the internet who are going to watch this. How weird is that?
That's very weird.
Very weird. It's for those of us in the Gen X, it's very weird that we could, in theory, reach a global audience with something like a conversation. The wonders of technology.
The internet's one of the salvations of humanity. So,
do you remember that network that used to exist, G4? Did you ever watch that channel G4 years ago?
Oh, sure.
There was a show on that called, I believe it was called Attack of the Show. If you remember Olivia Munn, she started many years ago on that. She was one of the co-hosts of it. And they had a segment on Attack of the Show called The Other 3% of the Internet. It's like the other 3% of the other 3% of the Internet. And the implication was that the first 97% of the Internet is all porn. So they had a segment where they would just cover things that weren't porn related on the internet, and it was only 3% of the whole. And so like when you say what you said something like the internet's the greatest thing or one of the greatest modern inventions. I don't remember what you said, but something to that effect. I was like, yeah, global digital monument to porn.
I think even that little few percent is enough.
3% of non-pornographic content.
Well, I think any little bit helps. I mean, just look at how information could have been controlled 100 years ago, 200 years ago. They're like 3 or 4 people. They decide something. That's the official story.
I will say I love decentralized communication. Like you said, it's almost like decentralized, but deregulated in a sense that it's easy now for even amateurs like us, for example, to produce content and edit content and then publish it to a wide audience. I mean, that would have been impossible, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? It would have been very difficult for us to share this kind of content without having to go through like a production company that would edit it, that would have a lot of like revisions that may distill it down to, less than the message we were trying to convey.
And there are still gatekeepers, but they're not. It's not as monolithic as it used to be.
Right.
Before, if you didn't get the approval, you didn't get the record deal.
Right.
And that was just it. Everybody's talking nowadays about nobody wants to go to work. It's like I just think it's so ridiculously simple to monetize talent nowadays on the internet. That's what everybody's doing.
Even our stuff, and I know that's not classified as talent, but whatever it is that we're doing, it has the capacity to be monetized. I mean, seriously, YouTube is an amazing thing. You got to get a big following. Okay, so maybe we're going to have to get a little bit of talent to get the following, but otherwise we can actually, in theory, make money off of having these discussions, which I enjoy the hell out of. I love doing this.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great thing as long as we can keep it going.
Yeah, I agree.
Because part of the thing about power is having access to stuff like that. So when you take that away, it removes one little peg. It's like, people need to start like mocking, like the instruments, the stuff these people buy. Like until like there's a million people, every time somebody walks down the street with a $1,000 suit or a $100,000 watch, there's 100,000 people on the internet going, "You're pathetic." How many people could that have helped? What the hell's wrong with you? And make the stuff that they buy so repugnant that
it's the
waste.
Consumption and hoarding of more than one needs. And again, we could go into a whole discussion about, what exactly is the amount that you need, and then who's going to arbitrate whether or not you're living beyond your needs and living beyond your needs. We could talk a lot about what the criteria is for determining what you need. We could talk about universal basic income as providing the minimum needs for everybody, and then any surplus beyond that is up to the individual if they choose to do it or not, but they can still live even if they don't want to go down that path of like production for the sake of consumption, or whatever excessive production for the sake of excessive consumption.
But I think ultimately, like I was saying, the people will decide.
Sure.
By voting, by mocking them.
It'll be interesting once we start to get followers to see how we get mocked. I'll bet you they have special ways of mocking us.
Oh, the internet's good like that.
They're very good about finding every flaw that we have and making us suffer for exposing it.
Yeah. When they could be making their own.
And we could be mocking them. Oh, you coward! Make your own damn videos.
Indeed.
Yeah, I don't know. That's cool. That's really cool. So many future discussions to have. One last thing, I guess, is when we did our first episode, we talked about there were 3 of us, us 2, and then we had a third friend who we had hoped would join us. We thought would join us. He wasn't able to make it last week, and he texted me just ahead of this meeting this week and said not able to make it today. But the very fact that he said that leads me to believe that maybe in the future, time permitting, as schedule permits, he my guess is he wants to join, and we'll try to join again. So that's not our special guest that we were talking about. That's just the third friend of ours that we were hoping would be a participant. He may show up here in a week or two, hopefully.
Oh yes, I just said heck yeah.
Oh yeah, right. Yep. So one last thing, I guess here it's January 2nd. This is Monday. Because we crossed over. It was January 1st when we started. So hopefully we'll get this episode published this week, and then I'm guessing. How does your schedule look? You think next weekend maybe we'll sometime or early next week we'll get to
Yes,
episode 3.
yes.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
I have the time. I just need to look at my calendar.
Very cool. Yeah, me too. Kind of getting back to work here, and it's going to be it'll be an after work thing. It'll be an evening thing, which is great. Cool, man. I got anything else? Any other topical? Any other just
Nope. Hope everybody has a happy, productive, or not productive, just happy year.
happy year? I agree. I was gonna say anything in news, sports, or weather that we want to cover. I feel like the news guy at 10 o'clock.
Not really. It's
Not really.
same old loop.
Same old crap. Same old crap. I don't even want to talk about how the Blues are doing. All right. Cool. This has been great. Thank you, and thank everybody for watching. And as Kassig said, have a good week. And we'll catch you on the next episode.
Bye-bye.
See ya. The opinions expressed in the preceding podcast are not necessarily those of the individuals who expressed those opinions. The creators and participants of this podcast hereby absolve themselves of any and all liability for damages that might arise as a result of the viewing, hearing, or acting upon the ideas expressed in this podcast. By watching or listening to this podcast, you hereby agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the creators and participants of this podcast from any and all claims, demands, damages, or liabilities resulting from the experiencing of the contents of this podcast.